Daniel spent the next week on high alert during his patrols. Every person he passed on the street, every car that drove by, he found himself comparing their faces to the photo Linda had shown him. Greg Haynes. The name was burned into his memory now. Daniel knew he was probably being overly cautious, but after everything Linda had told him, he could not afford to be careless. Kevin had noticed the change in Daniel's behavior and asked him about it one afternoon while they were parked outside a convenience store. Daniel hesitated for a moment, then decided to tell Kevin the truth. He explained that Linda Morrison had contacted him and warned him about a dangerous person who might be in the area. Kevin listened carefully as Daniel explained the situation. When Daniel mentioned that the person was working with aliens, Kevin's eyes went wide. He asked Daniel if he was serious. Daniel pulled out his phone and showed Kevin the photo of Greg Haynes. He told Kevin that if he saw this man anywhere, he should not approach him. Instead, he should call Daniel immediately. Kevin studied the photo and committed the face to memory. Then he asked Daniel what they were supposed to do if they actually found this guy. Kevin pointed out that they were just local cops and they were not equipped to deal with extraterrestrial threats. Daniel agreed and said that was why they were supposed to observe and report only. Linda Morrison would handle the rest. 2 days later, Daniel was on solo patrol in the afternoon. He was driving through the industrial district on the outskirts of Ashford, an area that was usually quiet. It was mostly warehouses and storage facilities that did not see much activity during the day. Daniel was about to turn around and head back toward town when he spotted someone standing near one of the old warehouses. The figure was wearing a dark jacket and jeans, looking at a phone. At first, Daniel did not think much of it, but as he drove closer, the person glanced up and Daniel got a clear view of the face. His heart nearly stopped. It was Greg Haynes. Daniel forced himself to stay calm. He kept driving past the warehouse, not wanting to alert Haynes that he had been recognized. As soon as he turned the corner and was out of sight, Daniel pulled over and grabbed the secure communication device Linda had given him. His hands were shaking slightly as he plugged it into his phone and activated the encrypted line. Linda answered on the first ring. Her voice was sharp and focused. Daniel told her he had found Greg Haynes. He gave her the location, the old Mason warehouse on 2nd Street in the industrial district. There was a brief pause on the other end. Then Linda's voice came back with clear instructions. She told Daniel not to engage under any circumstances. She said to keep his distance and maintain visual if possible. She was on her way with a team, and her estimated arrival time was 15 minutes. Daniel acknowledged the instructions and disconnected the line. He carefully repositioned his patrol car so he could observe the warehouse without being too obvious. Greg Haynes was still there, now talking on his phone. Daniel wished he could hear what was being said, but he was too far away and he did not dare get closer. Minutes ticked by slowly. Daniel kept his eyes on Haynes, who seemed to be waiting for something. Then a black van pulled up to the warehouse. Daniel watched as the side door of the van opened and 2 figures stepped out. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. The figures were not human. They were humanoid in shape, with 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head, but their movements were too smooth, too precise. Their skin had a faint grayish tint that looked unnatural in the afternoon sunlight. Their eyes were larger than normal human eyes and seemed to reflect light in a strange way. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. These were aliens, real aliens, standing in the middle of his town, talking to a human collaborator. Daniel grabbed his phone and started taking photos. He zoomed in as much as he could without losing image quality. He needed evidence of this, proof that what he was seeing was real. He sent the photos to Linda through the secure line. Suddenly, one of the aliens turned and looked directly at Daniel's patrol car. For a brief moment, their eyes locked. Daniel felt a strange sensation, like something was trying to push into his mind. It was uncomfortable and invasive, like someone was reading his thoughts. The alien said something to Greg Haynes and pointed in Daniel's direction. Haynes immediately looked toward the patrol car and reached into his jacket. Daniel saw the glint of a weapon. He knew he had been spotted, and he needed to get out of there fast. Daniel put the car in gear and drove away quickly, not looking back. He could hear the roar of the van's engine starting up behind him. His phone buzzed with a message from Linda. She told him to get out of there immediately. She said her team was 2 minutes away, and Daniel should head toward Route 9 where they would intercept. Daniel pressed down on the accelerator, weaving through the industrial streets. The black van was following him and gaining ground. Daniel could see Greg Haynes leaning out of the passenger window, holding something that did not look like any gun Daniel had ever seen. A burst of energy shot past Daniel's patrol car and struck the pavement ahead of him. The impact left a scorched mark on the road. Whatever weapon Haynes had, it was definitely not standard issue. Daniel swerved onto Route 9, pushing his patrol car to its absolute limit. The engine roared and the speedometer climbed higher than Daniel had ever driven on duty before. Up ahead, he saw a convoy of black SUVs racing toward him. The Human Defense Force had arrived. Daniel felt a wave of relief wash over him. The SUVs formed a blockade across the highway, and armed personnel in HDF uniforms poured out of the vehicles. They were carrying weapons that looked far more advanced than anything the police department had. All of them were aimed at the black van. Greg Haynes and the aliens had no choice but to stop. The van screeched to a halt, and for a moment everything went silent. Then Captain Alicia Ford's voice boomed through a loudspeaker. She identified Greg Haynes by name and told him he was surrounded. She ordered him to step out of the vehicle with his hands up. Daniel pulled his patrol car over to the side of the road, his hand still gripping the steering wheel tightly. His heart was pounding in his chest and his breath was coming in short gasps. He watched as Haynes and the two aliens slowly emerged from the van. They were immediately surrounded by HDF personnel who bound their hands with some kind of advanced restraints that glowed faintly. Daniel had never seen anything like them before. Linda Morrison approached Daniel's car and knocked on the window. Daniel rolled it down and looked up at her. She gave him a tight smile and told him he had done good work. She said he had just helped stop a major operation that could have had serious consequences. Daniel asked what Greg Haynes and the aliens had been doing in Ashford. Linda explained they were setting up a relay station. She said they were planning to use it to communicate with their fleet in space. If the HDF had not stopped them in time, it could have been disastrous. Daniel nodded slowly, still trying to process everything that had just happened. He asked Linda what would happen now. Linda told him that now he should go back to his normal life and try to forget this ever happened. She said if he could not forget, then at least he should not talk about it. Daniel let out a weak laugh and said that sounded easier said than done. Linda chuckled and said nothing about this job was easy. She thanked Daniel again for his help and told him he had done well today. Then she walked back to the HDF convoy. Daniel sat in his patrol car for a long time, watching as the vehicles drove away. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the highway. The whole scene felt surreal, like something out of a dream. Daniel finally started his car and began the drive back to the station. His mind was racing with thoughts about what he had just witnessed. He had seen real aliens, watched them get arrested by a secret government force and narrowly escaped being shot by some kind of energy weapon. It was the kind of thing that would sound crazy if he tried to tell anyone about it. But it had happened. It was real. And now Daniel knew the truth. There were threats out there that most people did not even know existed. And there were people like Linda Morrison and Captain Alicia Ford who worked in secret to protect everyone. When Daniel got back to the station, Kevin was waiting for him. Kevin took one look at Daniel's face and knew something major had happened. He asked if Daniel was okay. Daniel nodded but did not say anything right away. He sat down at his desk and tried to collect his thoughts. Kevin pulled up a chair and sat across from him. He asked again what had happened. Daniel looked around to make sure no one else was listening. Then he leaned forward and told Kevin everything. He described finding Greg Haynes at the warehouse, seeing the aliens, the chase, and the HDF intervention. Kevin listened in stunned silence, his eyes growing wider with every detail. When Daniel finished, Kevin sat back in his chair and let out a long breath. He said he did not know what to say. Daniel told him that was okay because he did not know what to say either. They sat there in silence for a few minutes, both of them trying to wrap their heads around the reality of what was happening. Finally, Kevin asked Daniel if he thought there were more of them out there. More aliens, more collaborators, more operations like the one they had just stopped. The days following the encounter with Greg Haynes and the aliens were strange for Daniel. He went back to his regular routine, patrolling the streets of Ashford, writing traffic tickets and responding to calls. But everything felt different now. He could not stop seeing the world through a new lens. When he looked up at the night sky, he no longer saw just stars and planets. He saw potential threats, unknown civilizations, and questions that might never be answered. When he looked at the people walking down the street, he wondered if any of them knew the truth. Or worse, if any of them were secretly working with alien forces like Greg Haynes had been. Kevin was dealing with the same feelings. The two of them would sit in the patrol car during their shifts and talk in low voices about what they had witnessed. They both agreed that they could not tell anyone else about it. Not their families, not their friends, not even the other officers at the station. The information was too sensitive, and the consequences of talking could be serious. Daniel remembered Captain Ford's warning very clearly. This conversation never happened. That was the rule they had to live by now. It was a heavy burden to carry, knowing something so important and not being able to share it with anyone except each other. About 2 weeks after the incident, Daniel received another message from Linda Morrison. This time it was not about danger or urgent warnings. It was an invitation. Linda thanked Daniel for his help and said that without his vigilance, they might not have caught Greg Haynes in time. She went on to say that she wanted to offer Daniel an opportunity to learn more about the work the HDF did. She made it clear there was no obligation. It was just a conversation. She asked if Daniel was available to meet. Daniel stared at the message for a long time. An opportunity to learn more. That could mean many things. Was she offering him a job? Or was this just a debriefing to make sure he understood how serious the situation was? Daniel typed a response saying he was interested and asked when and where they should meet. The reply came quickly. Linda told him to come to the Seattle field office the next day and said she would send him the address and clearance information he would need to get inside. Daniel showed the message to Kevin, who whistled softly and said this was getting real. Daniel agreed. The next day, Daniel made the 3-hour drive to Seattle. The FBI field office was located in a nondescript building downtown. It was the kind of place you could walk past 100 times without noticing it, but inside it was a different world entirely. Security was extremely tight. Daniel had to go through multiple checkpoints and show his ID several times before he was allowed to proceed deeper into the building. Each checkpoint had armed guards and scanners that looked far more advanced than anything he had seen at airports. Finally, after what felt like an hour of security procedures, Daniel was escorted to a conference room on the 8th floor. Linda Morrison was waiting for him there. She was dressed in a sharp suit and looked every bit the professional federal agent. She greeted Daniel with a handshake and thanked him for making the trip. Daniel told her to call him by his first name, and she smiled, saying he could do the same. They sat down at the conference table, and Linda slid a folder across to Daniel. She explained that it was a briefing document covering the basics of what the Extraterrestrial Division did. She warned him that it was heavily redacted, but it would give him an idea of the scope of their work. Daniel opened the folder and began reading. There were reports on various alien species, encounter protocols, threat assessments, and incident summaries. Some pages had large sections blacked out, but even the information that was visible was overwhelming. Daniel had never imagined that contact with extraterrestrial life had been this extensive. He looked up at Linda and asked how long this had been going on. Linda explained that the first confirmed contact was in 2003. Since then, there had been over 200 documented encounters with extraterrestrial entities. She said some of those encounters had been peaceful and even cooperative, but others had been hostile. The Human Defense Force was established to coordinate humanity's response and ensure that people were prepared for whatever might come next. Daniel asked about Greg Haynes and what his role had been. Linda's expression darkened. She said that Haynes had been a liaison for a group called the Collective. The Collective was a coalition of several alien species who viewed Earth as a strategic asset. They had been trying to establish a foothold on the planet for years, using human collaborators like Haynes to do the groundwork. Daniel said that was terrifying. Linda agreed and said that was exactly why they needed good people on their side. She said they needed people who were observant, who could think on their feet, and who could keep calm in a crisis. People like Daniel. Daniel looked up from the folder and asked if Linda was offering him a job. Linda smiled and said not exactly. What she was offering was a liaison position. Daniel would continue his work with the Ashford Police Department, but he would also act as a contact for the HDF in his area. If they needed eyes on the ground or local assistance, Daniel would be one of the people they would call. It was part-time, and it came with additional training and security clearance. Daniel asked what Kevin would think about this. Linda said that Kevin could be read into the program if Daniel accepted the position. She explained that they preferred to have teams rather than individuals, because it reduced risk and improved operational efficiency. Daniel sat back in his chair and thought about the offer. It was a lot to take in. This would mean becoming part of something much bigger than his normal police work. It would mean training, risks, and secrets. But deep down, Daniel knew his answer. He had seen too much to go back to pretending the world was simple. He told Linda he was in. She extended her hand and they shook on it. She welcomed him to the team. Over the next few weeks, Daniel and Kevin went through intensive training. They traveled to a secure facility outside of Seattle, where they learned about different alien species and their technologies. They studied encounter protocols and practiced threat assessment techniques. They underwent physical conditioning to prepare for situations that could escalate quickly. The training was exhausting but also exhilarating. Daniel felt like he was being given the tools to actually make a difference in protecting people from threats they did not even know existed. Kevin was equally committed, throwing himself into the training with enthusiasm. During one of the training sessions, Daniel and Kevin met other liaison officers from different parts of the country. There was a sheriff from Montana, a state trooper from Florida, and a detective from New York. All of them had similar stories. They had stumbled onto something they were not supposed to see, proven themselves trustworthy, and been recruited into this hidden network. It was reassuring to know they were not alone in this. There were others out there, quietly doing the same work, watching for threats and working with the HDF to keep people safe. The instructors were all experienced HDF personnel who had been in the field for years. They shared stories of successful operations and close calls, driving home the point that this work was dangerous but necessary. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of training, Daniel found himself sitting outside the facility with Linda Morrison. She had come to check on the new recruits and see how they were adjusting. Daniel told her honestly that it was harder than he expected, but he was glad to be doing it. Linda smiled and said that was the right attitude. She warned him that there would be times when the job felt overwhelming, when he would question whether it was worth it. But she assured him that every person they saved, every threat they stopped, made all the difficulty worthwhile. Daniel asked Linda how she managed to balance this work with being a mother. He remembered her daughter from the traffic stop. Linda's expression softened. She said it was not easy. Her daughter Samantha knew what she did for a living and understood the risks. Samantha was smart and mature for her age, which helped. But there were still nights when Linda came home exhausted and worried, wondering if she was doing the right thing by continuing this work. Then she would think about all the families who were safe because of what she and her team did, and she would know the answer. Daniel nodded, understanding what she meant. This was bigger than any one person. It was about protecting humanity as a whole. By the time the training was complete, Daniel felt like a different person. He had new skills, new knowledge, and a new sense of purpose. He and Kevin returned to Ashford and resumed their regular duties. But now they were also part of the HDF network. Linda checked in with them weekly, providing updates on ongoing investigations and alerting them to potential threats in their region. For the most part, things were quiet. But Daniel knew that could change at any moment. He kept the secure communication device with him at all times, ready to respond if Linda called. Kevin did the same. They had become sentinels, watching over their small town and ready to act if danger appeared. One afternoon, about a month after completing the training, Daniel was sitting in his living room when his secure phone buzzed. It was Linda. She told him they had a situation. Daniel immediately grabbed his jacket and asked what kind of situation. Daniel stood at the police station later that evening, trying to focus on the paperwork in front of him but failing completely. His mind kept going back to what had happened on Highway 47. The girl had been right. Her mother really was an FBI agent, and not just any agent, but someone who worked with something called the Human Defense Force. Daniel had never heard of the HDF before today, and now he could not stop thinking about it. Kevin sat across from him at his own desk, equally distracted. They had barely spoken since returning to the station. Both of them knew they had witnessed something that changed everything they thought they knew about the world. Kevin finally broke the silence. He asked Daniel if he really believed all of this was real. Daniel looked up from his paperwork and shrugged. He said he did not know what to believe anymore. They had seen the uniform, the badge, the way Captain Ford had carried herself with absolute authority. It was hard to dismiss all of that as a joke or a misunderstanding. Kevin nodded slowly and said he had been thinking the same thing. He pulled out his phone and started searching for information about the Human Defense Force. Daniel watched him scroll through page after page of search results. Most of it was conspiracy theory websites and forums where people debated whether aliens existed. Kevin read some of the posts out loud. One forum user claimed the HDF was formed after first contact with alien life back in the early 2000s. Another post said there had been multiple encounters since then, but the government kept everything classified to avoid causing mass panic. A third person wrote about seeing strange lights in the sky and military vehicles showing up minutes later. It all sounded crazy, but after what they had just experienced, Daniel could not dismiss it outright. Kevin put his phone down and looked at Daniel. He asked if Daniel thought any of this stuff was true. Daniel said he honestly did not know, but he was starting to believe that maybe there was more going on than they realized. That night, Daniel went home, but he could not sleep. He kept replaying the encounter in his mind. Linda Morrison's calm demeanor, her daughter's confident declaration, Captain Ford's stern warning. Everything pointed to something real, something hidden just beneath the surface of everyday life. Daniel got out of bed around midnight and went to his computer. He started searching for any official information about the HDF, but found almost nothing. There were a few declassified documents from government websites, but they were heavily redacted. Most of the text was blacked out, leaving only fragments of sentences that did not make much sense on their own. One document mentioned something called the Contact Protocol. Daniel clicked on the file and started reading. The protocol outlined procedures for handling extraterrestrial encounters, including guidelines for military and law enforcement personnel. It talked about maintaining social order, preventing panic, and ensuring that information was controlled and distributed carefully. The document was dated from 2004, which meant this had been going on for over 20 years. Daniel sat back in his chair and stared at the screen. If this was real, then everything he thought he knew about the world was wrong. Humanity was not alone in the universe, and there were people working in secret to protect everyone from threats most people did not even know existed. The next morning, Daniel was at his desk drinking coffee when his phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. He opened it cautiously and saw a message from Linda Morrison. She apologized for her daughter's behavior during the traffic stop and said the girl tended to be very protective of her mother. Linda also thanked Daniel for handling the situation professionally once he had been informed of the truth. She said not everyone reacted that way. At the end of the message, Linda told Daniel that if he had questions, he could call the number she was texting from. But she warned him that some answers were classified and she might not be able to tell him everything he wanted to know. Daniel stared at the message for a long time. Part of him wanted to call immediately and demand answers. He wanted to know what the HDF really was, what kind of threats they dealt with, and why all of this was being kept secret. But another part of him hesitated. He was just a small-town cop. Did he really want to get involved in something this big? Kevin walked over with 2 cups of coffee and set one down on Daniel's desk. He asked if Daniel was okay because he looked like he had seen a ghost. Daniel showed Kevin the text message. Kevin read it and let out a low whistle. He asked Daniel if he was going to respond. Daniel thought about it for a moment and then typed a reply. He thanked Linda for reaching out and said he appreciated the message. He admitted that he did have questions, but he understood if she could not answer all of them. He told her to stay safe out there, whatever she was dealing with. The response came almost immediately. Linda wrote back and said she would do her best. Then she added something that made Daniel's blood run cold. She said that not all threats came from the stars. Some of them walked among us right here on Earth. Daniel read the message twice to make sure he understood it correctly. Kevin leaned over his shoulder and read it too. He asked Daniel what that was supposed to mean. Daniel did not have an answer. Were there aliens already living on Earth in secret? Or was Linda talking about humans who were working with aliens? Either way, it was a disturbing thought. Daniel looked around the quiet police station at his fellow officers going about their routines. They had no idea what was happening behind the scenes. They did not know that there were agents like Linda Morrison out there, fighting battles most people would never hear about. Daniel felt a strange mix of emotions. Fear, curiosity, and a growing sense that his life was about to change in ways he could not predict. Over the next few days, Daniel could not stop thinking about Linda's message. He found himself paying more attention to things he would have normally ignored. A car with out-of-state plates sitting in a parking lot for too long. A stranger asking too many questions at the local diner. Lights in the sky that moved in ways planes should not move. Daniel knew he was probably being paranoid, but he could not help it. Kevin noticed the change in Daniel's behavior and asked him about it during their patrol one afternoon. Daniel admitted that he had been on edge since the traffic stop. Kevin said he felt the same way. It was like they had been let in on a secret and now they could not unsee it. 3 days after the traffic stop, Daniel received another call. This time it was Linda Morrison calling him directly. Her voice sounded tired but urgent. She said she needed to meet with him and that there was something important he needed to know. Daniel asked what it was about, but Linda said she could not discuss it over the phone. She told him to meet her at a diner on Route 9 about 20 miles outside of Ashford. The place was called the Bluebird Cafe. She said to be there tomorrow morning at 7 and to come alone. Daniel agreed without hesitation. His curiosity had won out over his caution. The next morning, Daniel arrived at the Bluebird Cafe 15 minutes early. It was a small, run-down place with faded paint and a gravel parking lot. There were only a couple of other cars there, both old pickup trucks that probably belonged to locals. Daniel went inside and found a booth near the back. A waitress brought him coffee without asking, and he sat there sipping it, watching the door. At exactly 7 o'clock, Linda Morrison walked in. She was dressed casually in jeans and a jacket, but Daniel could see the outline of a gun under her coat. She spotted him right away and slid into the booth across from him. Linda thanked Daniel for coming and said she appreciated him making the trip. Daniel said she had made it sound important, so he wanted to hear what she had to say. Linda nodded and looked around the diner to make sure no one was listening. Then she leaned forward and told Daniel that what she was about to say would sound insane, but she needed him to trust her. Daniel said he would listen with an open mind. Linda took a deep breath and started talking. She explained that the investigation she had been returning from when Daniel pulled her over was not just a routine case. She had been tracking a group of people who were working with an extraterrestrial faction. Daniel felt his pulse quicken. He asked Linda if she was telling him that there were humans helping aliens invade Earth. Linda corrected him and said it was not an invasion, at least not yet. But these humans were helping the aliens lay groundwork. They were setting up infrastructure, gathering intelligence, and recruiting more people to their cause. The HDF had been monitoring this activity for years, but recently things had escalated. That was why Linda had been working around the clock. Daniel sat back in his seat trying to process what he was hearing. It sounded like something out of a science fiction movie, but Linda was completely serious. Daniel asked Linda why she was telling him all of this. Linda met his eyes and said it was because one of the people they were tracking had been spotted in Ashford 3 days ago. The same day Daniel had pulled her over, Daniel felt a chill run down his spine.
He asked if the person was still in town.
Linda said it was possible. They had lost track of him, but his last known location was near Ashford. She said she wanted to warn Daniel and ask for his help. If he saw anything unusual or anyone acting out of place, he needed to contact her immediately. The afternoon sun beat down hard on Highway 47 as Officer Daniel Carter pulled his patrol car behind a silver sedan. The car had been weaving between lanes for the past mile, and he needed to check on the driver. It was a routine stop, nothing special, just another day on the job. Daniel had been a cop for 7 years now, and he knew the drill by heart. He stepped out of his car and walked toward the sedan with his hand resting on his belt. The driver was a woman who looked tired but calm. In the passenger seat sat a young girl with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. The girl looked about 12 years old, and her eyes were watching Daniel closely. Daniel reached the window and tapped on it lightly. The woman rolled it down and looked up at him. She did not seem nervous at all, which was unusual. Most people got at least a little worried when they saw those flashing lights in their rearview mirror. Daniel gave her a professional nod and spoke in his usual tone. He asked for her license and registration. The woman reached into her purse and handed over the documents without saying a word. Her hands were steady, no shaking, no fumbling. Daniel noticed this right away. Something about her was different from the typical drivers he stopped. She was too composed, too calm, like she had done this many times before. Before Daniel could ask his next question, the girl in the passenger seat suddenly spoke up. Her voice was clear and confident. She told Daniel that her mom was an FBI agent and that they had been on duty for 18 hours straight. She asked him to please make the stop quick because they needed to get home. Daniel paused for a moment and looked at the girl. Then he looked back at the woman. He could see the mother closing her eyes briefly, like she was trying not to get frustrated with her daughter for speaking out of turn. Daniel felt a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. He had heard all kinds of excuses over the years, but this one was new. Daniel could not help himself. A small chuckle escaped his lips. The girl was either very creative or had watched too many cop shows on television. He looked back at the woman and asked her if that was true. Was she really an FBI agent? The girl jumped in again before her mother could answer. She rattled off a name and a badge number. She said her mother was Special Agent Linda Morrison, badge number 47832, and that she worked out of the Seattle field office. The girl said all of this with complete confidence, like she was reciting facts from a textbook. Daniel shook his head slightly, still smiling. Kids these days had such wild imaginations. He turned his attention back to the woman, Linda Morrison, if that was even her real name. She sat there with a resigned look on her face, like she had been through this exact situation before and knew how it would play out. Daniel could not take the claim seriously. An FBI agent getting pulled over on a random highway, and her daughter just happening to announce it like that? It seemed too convenient. Too much like a story someone would make up to get out of a ticket. Daniel decided to play it safe. He told the woman to step out of the vehicle and to keep her hands where he could see them. His tone was polite but firm. He was not going to take any chances, even if this whole thing seemed ridiculous. Linda Morrison stepped out of the car slowly and deliberately. She kept her hands visible at all times, which Daniel appreciated. The girl stayed in the passenger seat, but she crossed her arms and gave Daniel a look that clearly said she thought he was making a mistake. Daniel walked back to his patrol car with the license and registration in hand. His partner, Kevin Blake, was sitting in the driver's seat waiting. Kevin was younger than Daniel, only 3 years on the force, but he was sharp and paid attention to details. Kevin looked up when Daniel got in and asked what was going on. Daniel told him about the kid claiming her mom was FBI. Kevin raised an eyebrow and asked if Daniel believed it. Daniel said he did not, but he was going to run the license just to be sure. Daniel typed the information into the computer mounted between the seats. The system took a moment to process and then displayed the results on the screen. Clean record, no warrants, nothing out of the ordinary. But then Daniel noticed something. There was a small notation on the license, a code he had only seen once or twice in all his years as a cop. It indicated some kind of federal affiliation. Daniel felt his smile fade. He leaned closer to the screen and pointed it out to Kevin. Kevin squinted at the code and asked if that meant what he thought it meant. Daniel said maybe, but it could also be a clerical error. Those things happen sometimes, especially with older licenses. But something about this did not sit right with Daniel. He decided to make a call to dispatch. Better to be safe than sorry, especially if there was even a small chance the woman really was a federal agent. He picked up his radio and contacted the dispatcher. He gave them the license number and asked them to verify if Linda Morrison had federal credentials. There was a pause on the other end, longer than usual. Then the dispatcher came back on and told Daniel to stand by. She said she was routing his request to the appropriate office. Daniel and Kevin exchanged a glance. The appropriate office? That was not standard procedure. Usually dispatch just ran the information and gave them an answer. Minutes passed and Daniel kept watching Linda Morrison through the windshield. She stood beside her car, patient and still. She was not looking around nervously or trying to make conversation. She was just waiting. Her daughter had gotten out of the car now too, and was standing close to her mother with her arms still crossed. The girl looked like she was annoyed more than anything else. Daniel drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, waiting for the radio to crackle back to life. Kevin asked if maybe they should just let the woman go with a warning. Daniel shook his head. He wanted answers first. Finally, the radio came to life again. But this time it was not the dispatcher. It was a different voice, a male voice, and it sounded very serious. The man identified himself as Supervisory Special Agent Grant Palmer from the FBI Seattle field office. He said that Daniel was currently in contact with Special Agent Linda Morrison. He explained that she was cleared at the highest level and was returning from an assignment. He told Daniel to release her immediately and to provide any assistance she required. Then he asked Daniel if he understood. Daniel felt his mouth go dry. He looked at Kevin, who had gone pale. Daniel pressed the button on his radio and said he understood. The radio went silent. Daniel and Kevin sat in the patrol car for a long moment, neither of them speaking. The kid had been telling the truth. Linda Morrison really was an FBI agent. Daniel felt a wave of embarrassment wash over him. He had laughed at the girl. He had made a joke out of it. And now he had to go out there and face them both, knowing he had been completely wrong. Kevin finally broke the silence and said they should probably go talk to her. Daniel agreed, but he did not move right away. He was trying to figure out what to say, how to apologize without making things worse. Before they could get out of the car, another vehicle appeared on the highway. It was coming from the opposite direction, a black SUV with government plates, the kind of vehicle that made you think federal agency the moment you saw it. The SUV pulled up behind Linda Morrison's sedan and came to a stop. The driver's door opened and a woman stepped out. She was in her mid-30s with short blonde hair and an athletic build. But what really caught Daniel's attention was her uniform. It was not a standard FBI outfit. It was something else entirely. The uniform was dark blue, almost black, with patches and insignia Daniel did not recognize. On her shoulder was a patch with 3 letters. HDF. Daniel had heard rumors about the HDF before. Whispers in law enforcement, circles about a branch of the government that dealt with things most people did not believe in, extraterrestrial threats, alien encounters. Most cops thought it was just conspiracy theory nonsense, the kind of stuff you read about on sketchy websites late at night. But here it was, standing right in front of him on a lonely stretch of highway. The woman in the HDF uniform walked over to Linda Morrison, and they exchanged a brief conversation. Then the HDF officer turned her gaze toward the patrol car. Her eyes were sharp and assessing. Daniel knew they had to get out there now. Daniel and Kevin stepped out of the patrol car and walked over to where Linda and the HDF officer stood. The girl watched them approach with a satisfied look on her face, like she had been proven right and she wanted everyone to know it. The HDF officer spoke first. She introduced herself as Captain Alicia Ford from the Human Defense Force. She explained that Special Agent Morrison was under her jurisdiction and had been conducting a critical investigation for the past 72 hours without rest. She said that Daniel's traffic stop had delayed Morrison's return to base. Her tone was not angry, just very matter-of-fact, but Daniel still felt like he was being scolded. Daniel swallowed hard and apologized. He said he had no idea and he was just doing his job. Captain Ford studied him for a moment and then nodded. She said she understood, but she wanted to make something very clear. Agent Morrison was one of the top operatives in the FBI's extraterrestrial division. She had clearance levels Daniel could not even imagine. Captain Ford suggested that the next time Daniel pulled over someone with federal credentials. 3 months had passed since the incident at the quarry, and life had developed a strange new rhythm for Daniel. During the day, he was still Officer Daniel Carter, patrolling the streets of Ashford and dealing with typical small-town problems. Speeding tickets, noise complaints, the occasional domestic dispute. But underneath that normal surface was another layer, a hidden life where he served as a liaison for the Human Defense Force. He had responded to 2 more situations since the quarry, both times working with Linda Morrison and the HDF team to investigate potential alien activity. One turned out to be a false alarm, just unusual weather phenomena. The other was real. A group of collective agents trying to recruit human collaborators. The HDF had shut down the operation before it could grow. Daniel was beginning to understand the scope of the hidden war being fought. It was not about massive invasions or epic space battles like in the movies. It was about small operations, intelligence gathering, and preventing problems before they escalated. The collective was patient and methodical, always probing for weaknesses and opportunities. The HDF had to be equally patient and vigilant. Daniel found the work both exhausting and deeply meaningful. He was making a real difference, even if no one outside the network would ever know it. Kevin felt the same way. The 2 partners had grown even closer through their shared secret, bonded by the knowledge of what they were protecting people from. One evening, Daniel received a call from Linda Morrison. Her voice sounded different this time, less formal and more personal. She said she wanted to thank Daniel and Kevin properly for their help over the past few months. She invited them to come to Seattle for what she called an informal gathering. It was a chance to meet other people in the network and share experiences. Daniel agreed and said he would talk to Kevin about it. Kevin was immediately interested when Daniel mentioned it. They both drove to Seattle the following weekend, curious about what this gathering would be like. The gathering was held at a private residence in a quiet suburb outside the city. When Daniel and Kevin arrived, they were surprised to see about 20 people there. Some were in uniform, HDF personnel and FBI agents. Others were dressed casually like Daniel and Kevin. Linda greeted them at the door and introduced them to the group. There was the sheriff from Montana that Daniel had met during training, along with the detective from New York. There were also scientists, linguists, and technical specialists who worked on analyzing alien technology. It was a diverse group united by their involvement in the hidden war. As the evening went on, people shared stories from their experiences. The Montana sheriff talked about tracking unusual animal behavior that led to the discovery of an alien observation post. The New York detective described a case where human criminals had unknowingly stolen alien technology, thinking it was just advanced human tech. One of the scientists explained how they were reverse engineering alien devices to better understand the threats humanity faced. Daniel found all of it fascinating. He had thought he and Kevin were alone in dealing with this strange new reality, but clearly there was a whole community of people working on these issues. Later in the evening, Daniel found himself talking with Captain Alicia Ford. She was more relaxed than he had seen her during operations, actually smiling and joking with people. Daniel asked her how she had gotten involved with the HDF. Captain Ford explained that she had been in the Air Force when she witnessed an encounter during a training exercise. After that, she was recruited and had been with the HDF for 8 years now. She said it was the most important work she had ever done, even though it meant living with secrets and missing out on a normal life. Daniel understood what she meant. The work required sacrifice, but it was worth it. Linda Morrison also opened up more that evening than she ever had before. She introduced Daniel and Kevin to her daughter Samantha, who was staying with relatives nearby. Samantha was polite but clearly protective of her mother. Linda explained that Samantha had grown up knowing about her mother's work. It was not easy for either of them, but they made it work. Linda said that one of the hardest parts of the job was the isolation, not being able to talk to most people about what she did. That was why gatherings like this were important. They reminded everyone that they were part of something larger, and they were not alone. As the night was winding down, Captain Ford gathered everyone together. She said she wanted to share some news. The HDF had been working with several friendly alien species to establish better communication and cooperation. One of those species had recently provided intelligence about a planned collective operation. The operation was large-scale and would require coordination between multiple HDF units. Captain Ford said that over the coming months, everyone in the network might be called upon more frequently. She wanted them to be prepared and to stay vigilant. The room grew quiet as people absorbed this information. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. A large-scale operation? That sounded serious. On the drive back to Ashford, Daniel and Kevin discussed what Captain Ford had said. Kevin wondered what kind of operation the collective was planning. Daniel said he did not know, but whatever it was, they needed to be ready. They both agreed to increase their vigilance and pay even closer attention to anything unusual happening in or around Ashford. When Daniel got home that night, he stood outside for a while looking up at the stars. He thought about all the people at the gathering, all working toward the same goal: protecting humanity from threats most people did not know existed. It was a heavy responsibility, but Daniel felt honored to be part of it. The following weeks were tense. Linda checked in more frequently, and the reports she sent contained more urgent language. There were increased sightings of collective vessels near Earth. More human collaborators were being identified and monitored. The HDF was working around the clock to gather intelligence and prepare for whatever was coming. Daniel threw himself into his work, both his regular police duties and his role as a liaison. He wanted to be ready for whatever happened next. Kevin was equally focused. They had both come to see this as their true calling, the most important work they would ever do. One afternoon, Daniel was at the station when he received an alert on his secure phone. It was from Linda and marked urgent. He stepped outside to read it. The message said that intelligence suggested the collective was planning to establish a permanent base somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. The exact location was unknown, but Ashford was within the potential zone. Linda asked Daniel and Kevin to conduct systematic surveys of remote areas around town, looking for any signs of unusual activity. She provided a checklist of things to watch for, from disturbed soil to unusual electromagnetic readings that could be detected with specialized equipment she would be sending them. Daniel showed the message to Kevin, and they immediately began planning their survey strategy. Over the next several days, they spent every free moment exploring the woods, abandoned buildings, and remote areas around Ashford. They used the equipment Linda had sent, devices that looked like modified tablets but could detect energy signatures and scan for non-terrestrial materials. For the first few days, they found nothing, but Daniel knew that persistence was key. They could not afford to miss anything. On the fourth day of surveying, Daniel and Kevin were checking an old logging road about 10 miles outside of town when Kevin's scanner started beeping. The readings showed unusual electromagnetic activity coming from deeper in the forest. They followed the signal carefully, moving through dense undergrowth and over fallen logs. The signal grew stronger as they went deeper into the woods. Finally, they came to a clearing and Daniel saw what was causing the readings. There were 3 large metallic structures partially hidden under camouflage netting. They were clearly not human-made, with the same organic-looking curves and angles Daniel had seen on the craft at the quarry. Around the structures, he could see several humans moving equipment. They were setting up what looked like a construction site. Daniel immediately pulled out his secure phone and contacted Linda. He whispered that they had found something big, 3 alien structures, and multiple human workers in a remote forest location. He gave her the coordinates. Linda's response was immediate and tense. She told Daniel and Kevin to pull back and observe from a safe distance. She said a full HDF response team was being mobilized and would arrive within the hour. Under no circumstances should they engage or let themselves be spotted. Daniel acknowledged, and he and Kevin carefully retreated to a position where they could watch the site without being seen. They settled behind a fallen tree and used binoculars to observe the activity. Daniel counted at least 8 humans working at the site, along with what appeared to be 2 aliens supervising the operation. Whatever they were building, it looked like it was meant to be permanent. This was not a temporary relay or observation post. This was exactly what Linda had warned about, a permanent collective base on Earth. The hour waiting for backup felt like an eternity. Daniel and Kevin stayed completely still, barely whispering to each other. They watched as the workers continued their tasks, unaware they had been discovered. Finally, the discovery of the collective base had major ripple effects throughout the HDF network. Intelligence gathered from the site revealed that similar operations were being planned in multiple locations across North America and Europe. The collective had been more organized and aggressive than anyone had realized. Captain Ford told Daniel during a follow-up briefing that the information they had recovered would help prevent dozens of similar attempts. Daniel felt proud knowing he and Kevin had played a key role in uncovering such important intelligence. But the discovery also meant increased workload for everyone in the network. The HDF needed more eyes on the ground, and Daniel and Kevin found themselves being called upon more frequently. Over the following months, Daniel participated in 6 more operations. Some were simple surveillance tasks, watching suspected collaborators and documenting their movements. Others were more complex, requiring coordination with multiple HDF units. Each operation taught Daniel something new about how the collective worked and how humanity was responding to the threat. He learned that not all alien species were hostile. In fact, several species had formed alliances with Earth and were actively helping the HDF share intelligence and technology. This gave Daniel hope. Humanity was not alone in this fight. There were friends out there among the stars, even as there were enemies. One particular operation stood out in Daniel's mind. He and Kevin had been asked to provide security for a meeting between HDF officials and representatives from a friendly alien species called the Atari. The Atari were humanoid but with distinctly different features, including slightly blue-tinted skin and eyes that seemed to shift colors. They were scientists and explorers by nature, and they had been monitoring Earth for decades. When the collective began showing interest in Earth, The Atari had reached out to offer assistance. Daniel had the chance to briefly speak with one of the Atari representatives through a translator. The alien told Daniel that humanity had great potential and it would be a tragedy if the collective succeeded in exploiting Earth. That conversation stayed with Daniel for a long time as Daniel became more involved with the HDF. He started to notice changes in his perspective on life. The petty concerns that had once bothered him seemed trivial now. Traffic violations, minor disputes between neighbors. These things still mattered in maintaining social order, but they felt small compared to the larger struggle he was part of. Daniel found himself thinking more about humanity as a whole, about the future of the species and Earth's place in the universe. Kevin noticed similar changes in himself. They talked about it during their patrols, wondering if they could ever go back to seeing the world the way they used to. Both agreed they probably could not, but neither of them wanted to. They had been given a gift, the knowledge of the truth, and with it came responsibility. Linda Morrison continued to be Daniel's primary contact within the HDF over time. Their professional relationship had developed into something resembling friendship. Linda would occasionally call just to check in, not about operations, but about how Daniel was handling everything. She understood the psychological toll that living with such secrets could take. She had been doing it for over a decade, and she knew the warning signs of burnout. Linda advised Daniel to maintain connections with people outside the network, to not let the secret work consume his entire life. Daniel took her advice seriously and made efforts to spend time with family and old friends, even though he could never tell them about the most important part of his life. About 8 months after that first traffic stop, Daniel received a call from Linda that was different from the usual operational updates. She asked him to come to Seattle for an important meeting. She said Captain Ford wanted to discuss something with him directly. Daniel agreed and made the trip the following day. When he arrived at the field office, he was escorted to a secure conference room, where Captain Ford and Linda were waiting along with 2 other HDF officials Daniel had never met. They introduced themselves as coordinators for the liaison program. Captain Ford got straight to the point. She said the liaison program had been so successful that the HDF wanted to expand it significantly. They needed someone with field experience to help train and coordinate new liaisons across the Western region. Captain Ford said they wanted Daniel to take on that role. It would mean more responsibility, more travel, and more involvement with HDF operations. But it would also mean he could make an even bigger impact by helping build the network that protected humanity. Daniel was stunned. He asked if this would mean leaving his job with the Ashford Police Department. Captain Ford said it would be a full-time position with the HDF, but they would work with local authorities to make the transition smooth. Daniel would officially be listed as taking a position with federal law enforcement, which was technically true. Linda added that she had recommended Daniel for the role because she believed he had the right combination of skills, judgment, and dedication. Daniel asked for time to think about it. This was a major decision that would change his life completely. Captain Ford said she understood and gave him 1 week to decide. Daniel drove back to Ashford in a daze, his mind spinning with thoughts about what this offer meant. That evening, he met with Kevin and told him about the opportunity. Kevin was quiet for a long time after Daniel finished explaining. Then he said that Daniel should take it. Kevin said Daniel had a gift for this work and that he could do more good in a larger role. Kevin admitted it would be strange working without his partner, but he understood this was important. Kevin also said he would continue as a liaison and would help train whoever replaced Daniel in Ashford. Daniel spent the next few days thinking deeply about the decision. He talked to his family, telling them he had been offered a position with federal law enforcement. They were proud and supportive, though they did not understand the full scope of what he would be doing. Daniel also spent time alone, walking through Ashford and thinking about everything that had happened since that traffic stop on Highway 47. His life had changed completely in less than a year. He had gone from being a small-town cop to being part of a hidden war for humanity's future, and now he was being offered a chance to play an even bigger role in that war. On the 6th day, Daniel called Linda and told her he had made his decision. He said yes. Linda congratulated him and said she knew he would make the right choice. She told him that arrangements would be made for his transition, and he would begin his new role within a month. The transition period went by quickly. Daniel trained his replacement in Ashford, a young officer who had shown promise and discretion. Kevin would help bring the new officer into the liaison network gradually. Daniel said goodbye to his colleagues at the police department, telling them he was moving on to work with federal law enforcement. Most were happy for him, though a few were sad to see him go. His last day in uniform felt bittersweet. Daniel's new role took him all over the western United States. He traveled to small towns and big cities, meeting with potential liaisons and conducting training sessions. He shared his experiences and taught others what he had learned about recognizing threats and working with the HDF. It was challenging work, but deeply rewarding. Daniel found he had a talent for teaching and mentoring. He could connect with law enforcement officers who were just learning about the hidden reality, because he remembered exactly what it felt like to have your worldview turned upside down. He helped them process the shock and fear, and guided them toward becoming effective members of the network. 6 months into his new role, Daniel was coordinating a training session in Colorado when he received urgent news. Linda called him and her voice was tense. She said there had been a major breakthrough in understanding the collective's long-term plans. Intelligence gathered from multiple sources suggested the collective was preparing for a coordinated push to establish multiple bases across Earth within the next year. The HDF was mobilizing for what could be their largest operation yet. Linda said they would need every available liaison and coordinator ready to respond. Daniel immediately shifted his focus to preparing his region. He contacted all the liaisons he had trained and made sure they were ready and equipped. He coordinated with other regional coordinators to ensure communication lines were solid. The next several weeks were intense. Daniel barely slept as he worked around the clock coordinating the network across his region. Reports came in daily of suspicious activity and potential collective operations. Some turned out to be false alarms, but many were real. The HDF was intercepting collective agents and dismantling infrastructure faster than ever before. It felt like they were in a race against time. Daniel found himself constantly on the move, traveling from one site to another, helping coordinate responses and supporting liaisons in the field. Through it all, he kept thinking back to that day on Highway 47 when he had pulled over Linda Morrison. If someone had told him then where that traffic stop would lead, he never would have believed it. But here he was, playing a key role in protecting humanity from threats most people did not know existed. 1 year had passed since Daniel accepted his position as a regional coordinator for the Human Defense Force Liaison Program. In that time, he had trained over 60 law enforcement officers across 7 states, helped coordinate 12 major operations against collective activities, and become one of the most trusted figures in the Western Region network. The work never got easier, but Daniel had grown into his role with confidence and determination. He still remembered that traffic stop on Highway 47, the moment that had changed his life forever. Sometimes he would laugh at how skeptical he had been when that young girl claimed her mother was FBI. If he could go back and tell his past self what was coming, he wondered what he would say. The predicted collective push had materialized exactly as intelligence suggested. Over the past 6 months, the HDF had intercepted dozens of attempts to establish permanent bases on Earth. Some operations had been stopped before they even began. Others had required significant resources to shut down. But the network Daniel helped build had proven invaluable. Liaisons across the country were identifying threats quickly and coordinating with HDF units effectively. Lives were being saved and Earth was being protected, even though most people would never know how close some situations had come to disaster. Daniel took pride in knowing his work was making a difference on such a large scale. Daniel maintained regular contact with Kevin back in Ashford. His former partner had become an excellent liaison and was training to potentially take on a coordinator role himself. Kevin had successfully brought the new officer into the network, and Ashford remained secure. They would video call every few weeks and share stories about their work. Kevin joked that he missed the simple days when their biggest concern was catching speeders on the highway. Daniel would laugh and agree, but both knew they would never want to go back. They had seen too much and learned too much. They were part of something greater than themselves now. Linda Morrison had become more than just a contact for Daniel. She was a mentor and friend. They worked together on multiple operations, and Daniel learned to read her moods and anticipate her needs during high-pressure situations. Linda had also opened up more about her personal life. Her daughter, Samantha, was doing well in school. and had expressed interest in eventually joining the HDF herself when she was older. Linda was conflicted about this. She wanted her daughter to have a normal life, but she also understood the pull of the mission. Daniel told Linda that Samantha would make her own choice when the time came, and whatever she decided, Linda should support her. Linda appreciated his perspective. One afternoon, Daniel was in his office reviewing training materials when he received a call from Captain Alicia Ford. She asked if he could come to HDF headquarters in Virginia for an important meeting. Daniel was surprised because he rarely dealt with headquarters directly. He asked what the meeting was about, but Captain Ford said she preferred to discuss it in person. Daniel booked a flight and traveled across the country. When he arrived at headquarters, he was struck by the scale of the operation. The building was enormous and filled with personnel from various departments. Daniel was escorted to a conference room where Captain Ford was, waiting along with several high-ranking officials he had never met. Captain Ford introduced Daniel to the others and then explained why he had been called. The HDF was establishing a new division focused specifically on human outreach and education. The goal was to eventually begin preparing the public for the truth about extraterrestrial contact. It would be a slow process, taking years or even decades, but leadership believed humanity needed to start moving toward transparency. The division would develop educational materials, work with media outlets, and coordinate with governments worldwide. They wanted Daniel to head the training and coordination branch of this new division. It was a massive promotion and would put him at the center of one of the most important transitions in human history. Daniel was overwhelmed by the offer. This was beyond anything he had imagined. He asked why they had chosen him. One of the officials explained that Daniel had shown a unique ability to help people understand and accept difficult truths. He had successfully brought dozens of liaisons into the network and taught them to handle the reality of extraterrestrial contact. Those skills would be essential for the larger task of preparing humanity. Captain Ford added that Daniel had also demonstrated integrity, judgment, and dedication. They trusted him completely. Daniel asked for time to think about it. The official said he could have 1 week, just as Captain Ford had given him before. Daniel spent the flight home thinking about the offer. This was bigger than anything he had done before. If he accepted, he would be helping shape how humanity learned about its place in the universe. It was exciting and terrifying at the same time. He called Linda that evening and told her about the meeting. Linda was quiet for a moment and then said she thought he should take it. She said the world needed people like him in positions of leadership, people who understood the reality of the situation, but also remembered what it was like to be on the outside looking in. Daniel thanked her for the advice and said he would think carefully about his decision. Over the next few days, Daniel reflected on his journey. He thought about that traffic stop when he had laughed at a little girl's claim. He thought about seeing real aliens for the first time and the fear and wonder he had felt. He thought about all the operations he had been part of, all the people he had trained, all the threats that had been stopped. He thought about the future and what it would mean if humanity knew the truth. There would be fear at first, maybe even panic. But there would also be possibility. Humanity could take its place among the stars as an informed species rather than an ignorant one. That future was worth working toward. On the 6th day, Daniel called Captain Ford and told her he would accept the position. Captain Ford congratulated him and said preparations would begin immediately. Daniel would start his new role in 2 months, giving him time to transition his current responsibilities to other coordinators. Linda called him an hour later and said she was proud of him. She also joked that he had come a long way from being the cop who pulled her over for weaving between lanes. Daniel laughed and agreed. Life had taken him in directions he never could have predicted. The transition period was busy and emotional. Daniel said goodbye to many of the liaisons he had trained, knowing he would see them again but in a different capacity. On his last day as regional coordinator, Daniel received a package in the mail. It was from Linda Morrison. Inside was a framed photo from that first traffic stop, somehow obtained from his patrol car camera. Linda had written a note that said she kept this to remind herself that the most important moments often seem ordinary at first. She said Daniel had proven that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when given the chance. Daniel smiled as he looked at the photo. There he was, walking toward that silver sedan, completely unaware that his life was about to change forever. He hung the photo in his new office as a reminder of where he had started. Daniel's first few months in his new role were intense. He assembled a team of specialists, including educators, psychologists, and communications experts. Together, they began developing materials that could eventually be used to educate the public about extraterrestrial life. They studied historical examples of how societies had handled paradigm shifts and developed strategies for managing the inevitable fear and confusion. It was challenging work that required creativity and sensitivity. Daniel found himself energized by the challenge. This was the most important work he had ever done. Kevin visited him at headquarters during this time. They walked through the facility together, and Kevin marveled at how far Daniel had come. Kevin said he was proud of his former partner. 6 months into his new role, Daniel was invited to attend a meeting between HDF leadership and representatives from several friendly alien species, including the Atari. The meeting was focused on coordinating the eventual disclosure process. Daniel listened as the aliens shared their perspectives on how other worlds had handled similar transitions. Some had gone smoothly while others had been chaotic. The key, they agreed, was patience and honesty.
Humanity needed to be given information gradually and truthfully.
Daniel found himself contributing to the discussion, sharing insights from his experienced training liaisons. The aliens listened to him with respect, and several thanked him for his dedication to protecting Earth. As time went on, Daniel settled into his role, and the work became his life. He traveled extensively, meeting with government officials, scientists, and educators. He gave presentations to small groups of carefully vetted individuals, slowly expanding the circle of people who knew the truth. The process was slow, but Daniel understood why it had to be. Humanity was not ready for full disclosure yet. But every person he brought into the network, every educational program he helped develop, brought that day closer. Daniel thought often about the future, about a time when children would grow up knowing about alien life the same way they learned about geography or history. That future seemed distant but achievable. One evening, Daniel stood on the roof of HDF headquarters looking up at the stars. The old quarry was on the outskirts of Ashford, a sprawling pit that had been excavated decades ago and then abandoned. Over the years, nature had started to reclaim it, with weeds and small trees growing between the rocks. It was the kind of place teenagers dared each other to explore at night, telling ghost stories and trying to scare one another. But tonight, as Daniel and Kevin approached the quarry, there was nothing playful about the atmosphere. The air felt heavy, and there was an unnatural stillness that made both men uneasy. They parked their patrol cars at the edge of the quarry and approached on foot, using their flashlights sparingly. During their training, they had learned that alien sensors could detect bright light sources from considerable distances. As they descended carefully into the quarry, Daniel spotted something unusual at the bottom of the pit. There was a faint glow, a bluish light that pulsed rhythmically like a heartbeat. It was definitely not natural. Kevin saw it too and whispered to Daniel, asking if he saw the light. Daniel nodded and told Kevin to stay low and keep his weapon ready. They moved from cover to cover, using the large rocks and debris scattered throughout the quarry to hide their approach. The glow grew brighter as they got closer, and Daniel could now see the source clearly. It was a small craft, no larger than a van, with smooth metallic surfaces that reflected the moonlight. The design was unlike anything made by humans, with curves and angles that seemed both organic and mechanical at the same time. A hatch on the side of the craft was open, and 2 figures stood nearby. They were humanoid but clearly not human. Their limbs were elongated, and their movements were too fluid, too precise. Their large dark eyes scanned the area as they examined something on a handheld device. Daniel and Kevin crouched behind a boulder about 50 yards away, watching the aliens work. Daniel pulled out his phone and activated the secure line to Linda. He whispered that they had visual confirmation. 2 aliens and 1 scout ship. They appeared to be conducting some kind of survey. Linda's voice came back immediately, telling Daniel not to engage. She said the HDF team was 5 minutes away and they just needed to maintain observation until backup arrived. Daniel and Kevin watched from their hiding spot, their hearts pounding. The aliens continued their work, completely unaware they were being observed. It was strange seeing them up close like this. In the movies, aliens were always portrayed as either terrifying monsters or incredibly advanced beings. These aliens looked almost fragile, with thin bodies and delicate features. But Daniel remembered from his training that appearances could be deceiving. Some of the most dangerous species looked harmless. Suddenly, one of the aliens froze. It turned its head sharply toward Daniel and Kevin's position, as if sensing something. Its large eyes narrowed and it said something to its companion in a language that sounded like a series of clicks and whistles. Kevin whispered urgently that the aliens knew they were there. Daniel could see the aliens retreating toward their craft. If the ship took off before the HDF arrived, it would be gone, and the opportunity to stop whatever they were planning would be lost. Daniel made a quick decision. He told Kevin they needed to delay the aliens somehow. Kevin asked how they were supposed to do that. Daniel thought fast and came up with a plan. Kevin would create a distraction by making noise to draw the aliens' attention. Meanwhile, Daniel would try to get close enough to the craft to disable it. It was risky, but they did not have many options. Kevin nodded and moved to the left, picking up a large rock. He hurled it against the quarry wall, where it made a loud crashing sound that echoed through the pit. The aliens turned toward the noise, momentarily distracted. Daniel used the opportunity to sprint toward the craft, staying low and moving as quietly as he could. His heart was racing and his mind was screaming at him that this was a terrible idea, but he kept going. He reached the craft and quickly looked for some kind of access panel or weakness. Near the hatch, he spotted what looked like an access panel. He pulled out his multi-tool and pried it open, revealing a tangle of wires and glowing components that pulsed with energy. Daniel did not know much about alien technology, but he figured the same basic principles applied to any vehicle. If he could damage the power source or propulsion system, it might ground the craft long enough for backup to arrive. He grabbed one of the larger cables that seemed to be carrying a lot of energy and yanked it free. The craft shuddered violently and the bluish glow flickered like a dying light bulb. One of the aliens shouted something in its strange language and started running toward Daniel. But before it could reach him, the roar of engines filled the air. The HDF convoy had arrived just in time. Multiple vehicles surrounded the quarry and armed personnel descended into the pit with military precision. Captain Alicia Ford was at the front of the team, her expression stern and focused. She barked orders to secure the area, and the HDF personnel moved with practiced efficiency. The aliens were quickly surrounded and had no chance of escape. They were restrained with glowing restraints that looked like advanced handcuffs. Daniel stepped back from the craft, breathing hard. His hands were shaking from the adrenaline. Linda Morrison approached him with a look that was part impressed and part exasperated. She told Daniel that was good work, but also reminded him that she had specifically said not to engage. Daniel apologized and explained that the aliens were about to leave and he had to do something. Linda sighed but admitted that his quick thinking had probably saved the operation. Captain Ford walked over to inspect the craft and then turned to Daniel. She said that grounding a scout ship was not an easy feat and Daniel had done well. She added that the HDF could use more people with his instincts. Daniel thanked her but said he was just doing what needed to be done. The HDF team began securing the craft and taking the aliens into custody. Daniel and Kevin stood at the edge of the quarry watching the operation unfold. It was impressive to see how efficiently the HDF worked. They had specialized equipment for everything, from containing alien technology to safely transporting extraterrestrial prisoners. This was clearly not their first operation of this kind. Linda came over to debrief Daniel and Kevin. She explained that the aliens had been setting up a communication relay that would have allowed them to contact their fleet. If the relay had gone online, it could have signaled a much larger operation. Daniel asked what would have happened if they had not stopped it in time. Linda said it was hard to say for certain, but the collective had been looking for opportunities to establish a stronger presence on Earth. A successful relay would have been a major step toward that goal. Kevin asked what would happen to the aliens now. Linda explained they would be taken to a secure facility where they would be questioned and eventually returned to their species through diplomatic channels. Not all alien contact was hostile, and the HDF worked to maintain relationships with friendly species. Daniel watched as the craft was loaded onto a specialized transport vehicle. It was surreal seeing alien technology being handled so matter-of-factly, like it was just another piece of evidence. But he supposed for the HDF personnel this was routine. They dealt with this kind of thing all the time. As the last of the HDF vehicles prepared to leave, Linda pulled Daniel aside. She told him that he and Kevin had proven themselves tonight. She said they had shown they could handle pressure and make good decisions in difficult situations. She wanted them to know that they were valued members of the network now, and she would be calling on them again when situations arose in their area. Daniel thanked Linda and said he was glad they could help. Linda smiled and told him to get some rest because he had earned it. Then she climbed into one of the SUVs and the convoy drove away, leaving Daniel and Kevin alone in the quarry. They stood there in silence for a few minutes looking up at the night sky. The stars looked different now. Knowing what was really out there, Daniel turned to Kevin and asked if he was okay. Kevin nodded and said he was fine, just processing everything. They walked back to their patrol cars and drove back toward town. The sun would be rising soon and they both needed to get some sleep before their next shift. When Daniel finally got home, he collapsed onto his couch without even taking off his shoes. His body was exhausted, but his mind was still racing. He kept replaying the events of the night in his head. The glowing craft, the aliens, the moment when he had yanked that cable free. It had all happened so fast. He thought about what Linda had said, about how they had stopped a communication relay. It made him realize just how much was at stake. Every operation mattered. Every decision could have far-reaching consequences. Daniel closed his eyes and tried to calm his thoughts. He needed to rest. He needed to be ready for whatever came next. Over the following weeks, Daniel and Kevin settled into their new roles as HDF liaisons. Most days were routine police work, but they were always alert, always watching. Linda checked in regularly and provided updates on threats in the region. She also sent them reports to study, keeping them informed about new developments and emerging patterns in alien activity. Daniel read every report carefully, absorbing as much information as he could. He wanted to be prepared for anything.